Welcome to another episode of Got Time with Christopher John, your scholar and gentleman in a hoodie. This episode is dedicated to Dr. John Fleming, known throughout the country for his scholarship and mentorship, recognized as the Godfather of Black Museums. As a historian, author, academic, and museum expert, his professional experience include museum directorships, management, and planning on historic preservation issues. Appointed by governors and presidents, and leadership roles in national and state museum associations. His awards include the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association of African American Museums, Award of Excellence from the American Association for State and Local History, Distinguished Service Award from the Association of Midwest Museums, and the Outstanding Professional Achievement Award from the Ohio Museums Association. Over his decades of work as a historian and museum director, he has established, directed, and supported many institutions. As the executive director of the National Afro-American Museum and Culture Center, Dr. Fleming led the way for increased inclusion of African American stories and culture into museums, presentations, and education. He served as the national chair of the American Association for State and Local History Council. His service on countless American Association of Museums committees and his efforts with the Smithsonian Institution's planning process are well known. He was an essential player in bringing the idea of a national African American museum to the mall in Washington, D.C. He served as the director and COO of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, director of the museums for the Cincinnati Museum Center, and the Afro-American Museum project director of the Ohio Historical Society. He was most recently the founding executive director of the National Museum of African American Music. He also served as director and chief advisor for the International African American Museum. He provided consultation for nearly 24 museums, including the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. His professional experience includes senior fellow for the Institute for the Study of Education Policy and assistant professor of history at Howard University. And he was also the executive producer of America I Am, African American Imprint on America, which was a national traveling exhibit he planned and curated with the Tavis Smiley Group. He also had served as the national president of ASALA, the study of African American life and history. If it wasn't for Dr. John Fleming, let's just say he left his imprint. This is a portion from my recent chat with Dr. Tonya Mathews, president and CEO of the International African American Museum, regarding Dr. Fleming.
But I myself actually was a product of now what I now understand was a long-term succession plan, like maybe 10 years of a gentleman who I didn't know. He didn't know me in the very beginning. I popped up in the middle. My name went in a file. This will be Dr. John Fleming. I ended up in the file. And folks like Dr. Fleming were actually intentional and deliberate. So I wasn't the only person he placed. He's been known to place folks, sort of all over the field. But like I said, it was a career long thing. It was always being on the lookout, not just for who could lead, but who needed to be reminded that they could lead, encouraged that they could lead, so that they would be ready 5, 6, 7, 10 years from now.
The 2025 Black History theme, African Americans and Labor, focuses on the profound impact of work in the lives and history of Black people. Feel free to revisit my Standing on Business episode regarding the theme and Asala. This nation's most foundational historical labor force is married to the nation's original sin, chattel slavery. When First Lady Michelle Obama talked about how it felt to be a Black woman waking up in the White House every morning, a building constructed with enslaved labor, it was a revealing testimony. From a geographical standpoint alone, it should come as no surprise that enslaved laborers were used to build the Capitol. Washington, D.C. was built on land ceded to the federal government by Virginia and Maryland. And at that time, the Potomac region was home to almost half of the country's enslaved population. While accounts reflect that D.C. commissioners originally tried to bring workers from Europe to build the Capitol, their recruitment efforts fell short. As a result, they forced local enslaved craftsmen to provide the labor, often renting them from their enslavers. Joining me is former senior advisor to the director at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. Her Smithsonian experience includes her service as the director of public engagement for the initiative Our Shared Future, Reckoning with Our Racial Past, organized to bring together resources from across the Smithsonian to explore how Americans understand, experience, and confront racism through several critical lenses like wellness, wealth, and the arts. Previously, she was the director of Troy University's Rosa Parks Museum in downtown Montgomery, Alabama. She also served as the director of education and outreach at the Coastal Heritage Society in Savannah, Georgia, and held the same position at the U.S. Capitol Historical Society in Washington, D.C., where she testified before Congress for a public memorial in recognition of the enslaved and free Black craftsmen who built the U.S. Capitol. A notable public historian and a museum field leader, Dr. Felicia Bell. Dr. Bell, can I call you Felicia? Because we keep,
Of
I
course.
introduced you as Dr. Felicia Bell, and I've been
Yeah.
knowing you for some time, and I'm just glad that you've taken the time to join me here today.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. And Chris, it's just an honor to be here on your podcast on Got Time. I'm so excited for you. I'm proud of you.
Oh,
And I think you're doing a wonderful job. And I can't wait to see where this goes. So I'm trying to get in early on Got Time, and so that way everybody else have to catch up. But this is this is wonderful. I'm so happy to be here.
well, thank you. I thank you. Well, I want to get into, this conversation. I talked about Asala and how they're really featuring this year's theme about African American labor. And so I want to get
Yes.
into, you have a unique scholarship and perspective when it comes to African American labor and as it relates to the capital. And
Hmm.
so, can we begin with the conversation discussing the role of the U.S. government in this exploitation of black labor, especially we're talking about this time frame this era when the capital and this is a new nation here.
Yes, labor, African American labor, uh, goes back so far in this country, really since we disembarked slave ships. So, um, my area of research is focused on the colonial, early American period, really. And just, I was curious about how our built environment came to be,
Hmm.
and how by that I mean buildings and roadways and bridges, canals, how we get urban settings, how we get colleges and universities, how we get state houses and seats of government throughout the colonies and the new states. So I was just curious about, when the public goes to visit these places, which are now, historically significant museums and art buildings. You go on these tours, and it used to be,
Hmm.
not so much anymore, hopefully, but rarely any mention of who built these buildings, or, who lived in the building, or who worked in the building, or you know labored in the building. And so I was curious when I first visited the Capitol. I was just curious because I didn't see anything on the walls or in
Hmm.
the exhibits. I didn't hear anything. I took a tour just like any other tourist took a tour, didn't hear anything about who built this building. So it was hard for me to find myself in this place. And by that I mean, when you go to historic sites and museums, you ought to be able to see yourself in the place. And I didn't hear or see anything about my people
Hmm.
and our contributions to this neoclassical 18th century structure that housed the seat of government and a global symbol of democracy, which is the US Capitol building. So that just sparked my interest, and I wanted to change that. And that's how I kind of began the research.
Okay. Now, when you went to go visit, did you already have
Yeah.
some knowledge already, or you were going in, or while you were going through that experience, you started to question it, or did you already have some knowledge going to your visit previous, prior to
A
visiting?
little, yeah, a little knowledge.
Hmm.
I mean, I knew that it had to have been built by enslaved people because of the time period it goes back to beginning of construction in 1790. So I knew that slavery existed in and around the area of the federal city, or what would be the federal city. And so I knew that, but I learned so much more in the process of research, right?
Right.
As we all do. We all go in with some understanding and what we think we know, and then as you continue on, you learn so many new things. So it was quite an experience in that way.
So let's get into it. You talked about, some new things. You talked about, labor relations, that time period. And so, can we
Mhm.
unpack some of those nuances? I would say that you learned that probably the average American doesn't know when we talk about that
Mm.
time period and also that building of the Capitol.
Sure, first uh, you have to figure out how it came to be that there was a decision made to use enslaved labor. That wasn't the first line of labor that was necessarily going to be used. So there were commissioners who were kind of responsible for the public works of creating this federal city, what we now know as Washington, D.C.
There was a
And
there was
so,
there was
yeah,
a push to get European workers, right? And
correct.
I
So
talked about that
they,
in my opening a little bit. Yes.
yes. And so they were responsible for procuring labor, and they initially tried to get European labor, but at that time, uh, well, even here, really, they tried to get labor here in the United States, but at the time we didn't have schools for architecture or anything.
Mm.
So there was, so they ended up getting labor from Europe, but also, there were people who were stone craftsmen who worked with stone and those kind of structures over in Europe. So they were kind of recruited to come here to do that labor. And then they had a competition for the architect, who would be the architect of the Capitol. So they launched that competition in local newspapers, that there would be a design competition.
Hmm.
And so, there were various, responses to that, and some interesting designs of the Capitol. And before that, it was finally decided that a physician named William Thornton would be named the first architect of the Capitol.
Wow. So he was a
Mhm.
physician by trade.
He was a
Yeah.
physician by training,
Uh-huh.
and he was from British West Indies, the island of Tortola. He was a Quaker, but his family owned enslaved people there. And so he came here to the United States, and he lived in Philadelphia, and he entered the competition, uh, and he won that competition. And of course, it's Thomas Jefferson sort of at a high level leading this whole arrangement of finding a designer and procuring labor and all that, and then the commissioners under him. So, yeah, so like I said, there were no architects. So this was a physician who happened to enjoy and in designing buildings, and that is what he submitted. So then it became an issue of who's going to build this. And so there were advertisements in local newspapers and regional newspapers to hire labor from local owners of enslaved people. So this was a practice throughout this Chesapeake region, hiring out. So you would hire someone. If you owned enslaved people, you could hire them out to another farmer for a specific time period,
Hmm.
and then they would pay you a certain amount of money. And then after the harvest or whatever was needed was done, then that enslaved person came back to you. So that was a general practice. And also in hiring out, the in some instances, the enslaved person was paid directly for their labor, or the person who hired the labor gave money to the enslaved person to give back to the owner. And so then in that case, there was some instances where enslaved people took the money and left, you know. Uh, and then there would be advertisements. This person, if you see them, they owe me money and I'm going to prosecute to the
Oh.
fullest extent, that kind of thing. So that went on as well.
Hmm.
But in some instances, enslaved people hired themselves out. So this was sort of a regional. It wasn't Slavery was never straight across, linear. It was always these gray areas depending on where you were. So in
Uh-huh.
Charleston, you have a population of majority enslaved people who were working in an efficient system of hiring themselves out. They even had slave badges, so called slave badges, that they wore that indicated the type of labor they did. And so then in the region of the Chesapeake region, you have the background is the soil is depleted, tobacco depleted the soil. So farmers begin to change the crops. So they have, wheat, corn,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
cereal crops. So these crops don't take as much labor, don't require as much labor as tobacco.
Right.
So enslaved people have time to be able to do other things, other non-agricultural skilled labor. So they do that: carpentry, sawyering, brick making, bricklaying. These are the laborers, trades of craftsmen and building trades. So they did that. And so naturally, I guess you could say, these owners of enslaved people like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and the commissioners, they uh, go and use a system that they're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And so they use the system of hiring out to procure labor. And so, there ends up being what I have found in my research into the hundreds of indicating enslaved people laboring at the Capitol during this time period of 1790 to 1800.
Would you, if you don't have the numbers, could you get or give a guesstimation? The
Well, I
the
have seen in my research 800.
800. Were there? Let me ask this question: were there any white laborers? Were there the black craftsmen that are
Mhm,
building the Capitol? Were
mhm.
they working with, like, say, European craftsmen
Yeah,
that were
that's a
there?
very good question. Yeah, and there were European and or white American laborers working alongside these enslaved craftsmen or on in various areas of the construction site,
Mm-hmm.
right, or off site, but they were. And what happens is, you know, they end up complaining because they are not getting paid enough to maintain their tools, to live in the District of Columbia. Even back then, it was expensive to live in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So they complained about that. So they did what we would call a strike. So they struck several
Oh.
times
Uh huh.
and stopped working. And so then the commissioners are now solely relying on enslaved labor. So, so this ends up being sort of the mainstay of how we get the Capitol built. And so there's a timeline on this construction project because
Mm-hmm.
of the Residence Act that was passed in Congress and included in the Constitution, that the Capitol, federal buildings must be built. Public buildings must be built in the federal city, excuse me, by 1800.
Uh huh.
And there should be suitable buildings to house the Congress, the Supreme Court, uh, the President of the United States. So they wanted to have all these buildings built by 1800.
Wow. So let me try to make this plain as much as possible in getting this
Yeah.
information. You have a labor force, which is a mixed labor force, not only around racial lines, but of enslaved workers and also workers who are not enslaved. And
Hmm.
then, but the work is taxing on the materials, not as well as that they are using, so they decide to strike. And so enslaved labor becomes
The white,
the
yes.
white, yeah.
Hmm.
So enslaved labor, black hands, becomes the primary labor force for building the Capitol. Did I?
Precisely.
Wow.
And so, in other words, it would not have been completed had it not been for enslaved and free black craftsmen.
Wow. Wow.
It would
So
have it would not have been completed by 1800 by the
exactly,
deadline.
because it was
Correct.
a deadline. Understand?
Correct. And construction went on beyond that because at 1800, what you end up with at the Capitol is just uh, a small portion of what we see today on the Senate side of the Capitol, uh, and it was just a small structure. And so that housed the Congress, it housed the library, it housed the Supreme Court, all of that in that one section. So when you go on the Capitol today and you see the old Supreme Court chamber, that is a part of that section. And then later, after 1800, the Capitol continues to expand throughout the years, over the years,
And
and then up and even until the Civil War, when the dome is completed.
and was that continued work also done by enslaved labor as well after
Correct.
1800s?
Right. So we know that enslaved people were continuing to labor at the Capitol after 1800. So there are instances where there's one instance where I found there's um, one fatality that I've found record of, and that is of an enslaved man who was crushed to death at the Capitol. And he was clearing off a stone in order for another piece of stone to be set on it. And in doing so, um, he did not clear the way before another stone fell upon him, and he was crushed to death, sadly. There also was an instance after 1800 where the only instance of resistance that I come across where uh, there's an advertisement for an enslaved man who ran away from the Capitol. And so his owner is seeking his return and offering a reward for that. So then later, after the Civil War or near the end.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the dome continues to be constructed as instructed by President Abraham Lincoln at the time. And then at the top of the dome, a Statue of Freedom is installed. And that statue was cast in bronze by an enslaved man named Philip Reed.
What?
Um,
Philip
yeah,
Reed. Okay, okay,
correct.
okay. I got to pause you right quickly here because this is
Okay,
so. The building of the Capitol is continued to be worked on all the way through the 19th century, leading up even into Lincoln's presidency. Correct.
correct.
And that
Yes.
labor that is being done, even under that administration, still is by enslaved hands.
Uh, yes. So Philip Reed was enslaved. And
Yes.
so when the Statue of Freedom was arrived, and then it had to be it was in plaster and it was in six parts, and so it had to be put together, and the Italian craftsmen who could do that uh, for whatever reason refused to. I'm not sure if it had to do with money or but and then Clark Mills, who is a sculptor, a renowned sculptor at the time, he sculpted the statue of Andrew Jackson in Lafayette Park, just behind the White House, the first bronze statue in the United States. So he cast that statue in bronze and sculpted that statue. Excuse me. And so he was commissioned to um, cast the Statue of Freedom. And so the the statue itself was designed by Thomas Crawford, who was an American sculptor living in Rome at the time. Then it was sent here to the United States. And then Clark Mills, who had a foundry nearby uh, and who was commissioned to do this work, said, I will do it. And at the time, he had 11 enslaved people. And so Philip Reed was one of his enslaved people that he owned who worked in the foundry. He had purchased Reed back in Charleston, South Carolina, some years before when he was a young boy. And Reed I guess, apprenticed or worked in in his sculpting studio and everything. So kind of knew how to work in the foundry. He kind of trained him that way.
Right.
And so Reed worked in the foundry, and it was, very hazardous. It was extremely hot.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
It was a brick structure, an octagon shaped brick structure, the foundry was. And there were windows on the sides and a cupola at the top, and to, kind of circulate the air. But, working in a foundry is hard work, especially in those conditions when you have to heat metal to 2,000 plus degrees to get to where you can um, manipulate it. So, yeah, so difficult work. And we know from receipts where he was paid for his labor that he stayed up during the night keeping fires under the molds uh, that were to be cast. So uh,
Wow.
difficult labor.
I'm just amazed by how much work and construction was done, on this structure and also around it. And you talk about the continuum of the building, and I know you had conversations, and I brought up on this podcast beforehand about January 6th,
Hmm.
and the storming of the Capitol. Uh, and you shared a unique perspective that you have because you're bringing this information about the craftsmanship and the you brought, you talking about names of individuals who were involved in building this structure, and you were looking at that through a very unique lens. Could you share your feelings? I know that you wrote an article about it as well, but could you share
Oh
to my
yeah.
listeners and my viewers,
Mhm.
your feelings and your perspective of when you looked at
Mm.
going back to January 6th and what took place?
Yeah, I thank you for that. I wrote an article, an op-ed piece for the Washington Post, and I just, sort of just released and my feelings about what happened that day in my living room, watching it all unfold on television like so many others. And I was heartbroken. I was angry. I was disgusted, disappointed, all of the feelings. And when you research something and you for years and then write about it, and it becomes so close to you, and then you see your fellow humans just sort of uh, destroying
Yes.
this building that is such a precious part of our nation's past and so unique in that we are still using it for it's in continuous use for democracy and for freedom. And so many other nations in the world look to us for that. And to see this happening in front of me, I just couldn't believe it. And I immediately thought of the enslaved and free Black craftsmen and all of their work. And these individuals were busting windows and climbing the walls and hurting people and killing people, and all these things happened. And so it was just so sad to see, and just such a disgrace, and such an abandonment of what we claim to be our principles and what we stand on. And so that is basically what I wrote about. And just um, I felt an act of racial terror
Wow.
because I just believe that this building is there because of the contributions of enslaved and free Black people. And I think that it was just sort of stomping on that,
Right.
and disrespect of that. And it was just heartbreaking.
Wow. I will say, this has shifted my view when I look at the structure.
Mm, hmm,
Being
hmm.
aware of the involvement. Um, you know, it's been said before, about the Capitol being built, but just to have the knowledge and to have the details that you've shared,
Yes.
and
Hmm.
that you're continuing to share, because my understanding is you're
Hmm.
working on a book
Yes, yes,
about this,
yes.
correct? Yes.
Yes, yes. So I'm currently a fellow with George Washington's Presidential Library, and so I'm excited to be have a fellowship for that to get this manuscript published soon, hopefully. So yes, and we didn't even touch on some of the hazards of labor and some of the things they endured while working. So
So what were
it's just so much. Yeah,
before, well,
yeah,
we talked about the labor and you talked about the
yeah,
hazards, because I'm
yeah.
thinking, I'm looking at, I mean, the building is, how tall is it? I mean, you're talking about
You're
people that
right.
are working at great heights. You already talked about the one casualty.
Correct.
Uh,
Well, even offsite, so like there were quarry, they had to get the stone,
uh
right,
huh.
to build it. So there were quarries in Maryland and Virginia. And so the men who were laboring at the quarries, they were isolated. They were given very minimal provisions, including alcohol, to help them so-called cope with the isolation.
Wait. Hold on,
Uh,
hold on. We got to
yeah.
pause there for a minute. So,
Okay.
they are working in these conditions
Mhm.
where they are isolated. They're basically in, almost like they're, what we went through with the pandemic, being quarantined. You're just in one area, you
Mhm.
can't go anywhere and whatnot. And so they were
Mhm.
medicated with alcohol to deal with that situation.
Sure. And then, in the summer
Wow.
months, you have, the heat, and, the conditions were just horrible. And, having to chip away stone from the earth is hard labor. And let alone even if you do it in the winter months, when really that's not the time to do it,
Uh-huh.
because you have so many cracks and crevices and water gets down in there, freezes, then it's definitely hard to remove stone from the earth. So, but they work during those months, and so we have evidence of that. In December, they're out there quarrying stone, and there's reference to keep them working. You know, so in correspondence. So just to know that they worked so hard and went through so much, and then to see what happened on January 6th just made my stomach turn.
Wow. Wow.
Mhm.
So, we talk about, what occurred on January 6th, and we're still, be quite honest, we're going through a continuation of that to this
Mm,
very day,
mhm, mhm,
of not only the structure, but the principles being disrespected, but
mhm.
also, the legacy. Um, and so, with you being within museums, and I'm gonna ask you this last question. How do you feel about, this attack or assault on Black
Mm,
legacy?
mm.
How the book that you are working on could very well be a book that they would consider divisive and that could be banned
They
and
may
all
ban
the
it,
above. Yes. So
right?
what are your
Maybe
feelings
ban.
about?
You never know. Oh boy, I think I would just say I think now is the time for us to lean into our local historical societies, our local museums, small museums, our local public library, our local historic sites, and support and volunteer and donate to those institutions and visit. Take your family, take your children, and you have to visit these places because when we don't celebrate, and when we don't engage and participate, then it looks as if no one cares anyway. So we'll just take that. Well, we'll just take that. We'll pull funding for that. Nobody's using it. When's the last time? Look at the numbers. What are their numbers? Their annual numbers for attendance. Well, nobody's going there anyway, so we'll just pull the funding. you
Right.
know. But we have to continue to support our local museums, historic sites, libraries, bookstores, small businesses is so important, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down with me for this conversation. Hopefully, our the viewers and listeners will be uh, intrigued to learn more about this building, the Capitol, but also understanding
Okay.
about African American labor and how it has been
Absolutely.
essential
Essential. Yes. Yeah.
in the building of this country. And so I applaud the work that you continue to do, and don't let nothing or nobody stop you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your encouragement, and thank you for having me. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Brick by brick, Black hands have built this country. From cotton fields to the Capitol, Black's lives have been an essential foundation. It is now as it was then. There are two Americas, one made of those who build this country, the other made of those who occupy this country. Amid these times to erase and diminish the truth, amid these times to assault blackness while coddling white patriarchy, let us not forget the power of our voice and our labor. I am your scholar and gentleman in a hoodie. Know thy history.